So ladies and gents, it's now 12:30, so it's a perfect time to start this afternoon's talk. And this afternoon's presentation is entitled Long-Term Care for England. And we do other long-term care presentations for different parts of the UK. Now, let me introduce myself just before we start this webinar. So my name is Greg March. I'm a Senior Financial Education Coach for My Money Matters. And I've got the pleasure of taking you through the next 15, 20, 25 minutes or so, exploring all things to do with long-term care. Now, just before we start the webinar, let me just point out that the information I'm about to give you has been designed purely for educational purposes only. So please don't take anything that I say today as regulated financial advice. And also the information I'm about to give you is based upon our current understanding of taxation, legislation and regulations, and this could change in the future. And also just be aware that the webinars are recorded for training and compliance purposes. Now, during today's talk, if you do have any questions, then feel free to ask those questions. And the way in which we do that is by using the Q&A box that you can see on the top right-hand side of your screen. So if you've got a question, drop it into the Q&A box and I'll do the best that I can to answer this question for you going forward. What I would say, though, please keep those questions to a generic basis if you can, because this subject is actually quite complex and I'm not here to offer you any forms of financial advice. So keep the questions to a generic basis if you can. So what are we going to look at today before we start? So just before we actually start the full webinar on long-term care, what I want to do is just introduce what's happening to the platform. And as you're all aware, we've changed from AVC Wise at the beginning of this week, and we've rebranded ourselves now as My Money Matters. And the reason for this is that under AVC Wise, we're offering purely education on the shared cost AVC. So this is the pension product that you've got available to you via the local government. So what we've decided to do is expand that and offer you education and support elsewhere as well. So now we're in a situation under My Money Matters that we can offer you education on the following themes. So debt and money management, savings and investments, estate planning, which we're on for today, insurance and protection, and also retirement planning. And within those 5 themes that we're offering, we've got education that covers all aspects of what we need when it comes to financial education. So we've got education on mortgages. So if you've got members that are first-time buyers and want to find out what it costs to get onto the mortgage ladder, we've got education around that. Credit scores, debt handling. We're also going to be talking about savings and investments, taxation on savings. Under estate planning that you're on today, we've run a webinar this morning already on wills, and we've got one this afternoon on inheritance tax. So feel free to come back and join the one on inheritance tax this afternoon. Under insurances, then we talk about generic insurances, and then we've got, as you would expect, a plethora of information on pensions, on the share cost ABCs, and all of that can be found under the retirement planning theme. So the purpose of actually showing this slide is that when you're looking at My Money Matters now, what we would like you to do is come to as many webinars as you can. So therefore you can build up a picture and you can increase your financial education going forward. And all of this, remember, is free of charge to yourself, so just make the most of it whilst you're able to. So let's come back to today then. So what are we going to be looking at this afternoon? Well, the first thing is we'll ask the questions, what is long-term care? And we'll talk about the implications of that. And the most important thing I think about the whole of this webinar today is understanding who pays for it and what happens if you've got savings going forward. And then not only are we going to talk about the problem that is long-term care, we're also going to look at some solutions as well. So what can you do? So let's start off then by asking the question then, what is long-term care? And realistically, long-term care is something that's becoming more and more common now because we're living a lot longer. So this is the support that's actually required when we live longer and also when the unexpected could happen. And this unexpected could well be that you're not able to perform what we call your activities of daily living. So this is the phrase that the NHS use, and we'll touch upon that in more detail in just a moment. You may need long-term care if unfortunately you've been struck down with some form of disability. As we mentioned, you could have a long-term illness, but it could even be that our mental incapacity has gone as well. So for all of these reasons, potentially we could need some support going forward. And there's one thing I would say when we do look at the long-term care scenario is that when you're looking at this, remember this can happen at any time. So this is not something that just happens as we get older. This could happen at any given time. So what I'd like to do is just quickly take you through these things called the ADL. So this is where a lot of people will be assessed when it comes to long-term care. So activities of daily living. So what are these? So what these basically are a series of tests that are basically done to see if you can perform on a day-by-day basis on your own. And the answers to these tests, or the results from these tests, will then determine the type of support that you get. So when you look at the test, they look at things like the function mobility test. So they see if you're able to walk and transfer in and out of bed or a chair. So can you get up from a chair without using your arms? These are the types of tests they look at under the functioning mobility. They'll also look at your personal hygiene as well, basically asking the question, are you able to look after yourself when it comes to your personal hygiene? So this is brushing your teeth, your hair, having a shower or a bath on a regular basis. And incorporated in that, as you'd expect, is toileting. Are you able to get on and off the toilet, a standard toilet? And are you okay with self-cleaning? And one of the other activities of the daily living is where we look at the ability to dress ourselves or undress ourselves on a regular basis. And then finally, self-feeding. So when the NHS looks at testing us when it comes to the need for care and the care homes and the care support they offer, then this is the fundamental test that they'll have. There'll be 5 separate functions, and it depends on how well we score with those functions will then depend on the type of care that we can get and if it's being supported financially. So when looking at care, and more importantly, when looking at care homes, then these do come in 2 different flavours, if that makes sense. The first one is a residential care home. So this is where you get help with some of the ADLs that we've just discussed. And then the second home that's available is the nursing care home. And again, they give you the help of the day-to-day living, as we've just discussed, addressing meals, social activities, and so on. But in addition to that, under a nursing home, you're also getting that registered nursing care, and they'll help you then with your individual medical needs. So when we're looking at the cost of these, then there is an average cost in the UK. Now, some of you may agree with this average cost. Some of you may disagree with it, but it is an average cost. So for residential care homes, the average cost throughout the whole of the UK is between £800 per week or £41,500 roughly per year. Now, remember, this is an average. My uncle's been in the care home for quite a while, unfortunately passed away just a couple of weeks ago, but his cost was a lot higher. And the reason for that is that there are regional variances with this cost. So if you're in London and the London area, then you could be paying as high as £82,000 a year for long-term care. Whereas if you're living in further east, like Hull or some place like Wigan, then the cost of care there is going to be £33,000. So there is a massive variance. So it is a little bit like a postcode lottery when it comes to the cost of residential care. But the average is just over £41,500 per annum. Now, when you're looking at this, the figure on its own, £41,500 as an average, is an astonishing amount of money that we have to pay for care. And that's something that potentially you might need to consider when planning going forward. Now, if we add into that the fact that we might need nursing support, so we have to go to a nursing home, then again, the costs vary. And throughout the whole of the UK, the average cost for nursing home is just over £1,000 per week. And again, you may agree or disagree with that one. And on an annual basis, that's roughly £56,000. But if you live in London, you'll expect the cost to be a lot higher. And if you live in slightly north or in the east, then the cost could potentially be lower. So when you're looking at both aspects of this, you're looking at anywhere between £800 and let's say £1,100 on average per week to get some form of support. That's a lot of money from anybody's pocket. And that's why long-term care is now a big thing in the marketplace. It's something that we all have to consider as part of our strategy for life, if that makes sense, that it may be something that has to be funded. Now, what I would say is that when you are thinking about nursing homes, maybe for yourself or if you're in that capacity, or maybe for parents if they're still around or grandparents, then do some research. And if you go to this website, cqc.org.uk, what they will do is talk about the different types of homes that are available. So CQC stands for Care Quality Commission, and they're responsible for the regulation of adult health and social care. Now, they won't tell you the prices for the homes, but what they will do, though, is they'll highlight the quality of the care given. So it's a little bit like having like Ofsted, should we say, for care homes. So do your research if you can. Have a look at that to see the type of care homes that are available in your area. But it can be, if you're getting registered support, it can be a little bit of potluck to where you live, to what support you get as well. So £800 to just over £1,000 on average per week if you need to go into some form of care. Now, thinking of it logically, that's big business, and it is big business. And therefore, you need to be aware of how this has changed going forward. So if we go back to the 1980s, only 225,000 beds were made available, and they were offered by the NHS, the local authority, and they were not for profit. But since 1980 up until today, there's been a major change into the way in which care is offered. And in fact, if we look at the latest figures, so public sector beds today, they're only offering 25,000 beds. The rest of the beds, 380,000 of them, are now being offered to individuals by the private sector. And that's because this is a booming industry. So if you drive up and down the street where I live not too far from Harrogate in York. When I drive up and down different areas, I see now more homes appearing than ever before. And I'm also seeing a lot more of these over 50s areas where you literally sell your house, move into an apartment that is kind of looked after, but you've got your own private pools in there, you've got your private shopping centre. So the elderly is now becoming a big business. And if we do look at long-term care, that forms part of that overall scenario, if that makes sense. Okay, so the question is then, who pays for long-term care? That's the question that we get asked quite a lot. So this does depend on the type of care that actually is required. There is this misconception that the NHS is responsible for funding all of long-term care. It's not the case, but there is support put in place. So these are the things that are available and that potentially you need to do a bit of research on when it comes to long-term care and long-term care funding. So the NHS does offer continuing healthcare. They also offer funded nursing care, but it's likely for a lot of us that any form of care that we need potentially is going to be, if not fully funded, but partially funded by ourselves. Now, let's break this down if we can. Now, this does get confusing. It's going to be a lot of numbers I'm going to throw your way. But remember, these videos are recorded, and at a later stage, they will be put, and I say at a later stage, it won't be instantaneously, they will be put onto YouTube so you can view them at a later stage. If we're going through these figures and you're getting a little bit confused, what I recommend you do is book on, again, another webinar for the same region. Remember, it differs. Book on another webinar and just come back and view these again at a later stage. So let's look at how all this works. So we've got the NHS continuing healthcare. So this is where we're assessed, and we're assessed in line with a national framework, and that framework can get quite confusing, but I'm going to show it to you in just a moment. And you get support on the NHS continuing healthcare if you're an individual who's got a primary health need. And what they do when they assess that, they look at the nature, the complexity of your needs. They also look at the intensity of the needs and your unpredictability. So when they're looking at you and assessing you for NHS continuing healthcare, which is very difficult to get, by the way, they will look at the type of illnesses you've got, the type of things you're presenting, and they look at the nature, the complexity, how intense it is, and also the unpredictability as well. Fully funded by the NHS if you get through, but what they do though, so if you need to go in a home, they'll fully fund the home. What they will do though, if you are lucky enough to get the NHS continuing healthcare, is that they will review it after 3 months and then every 12 months, just to make sure you still fit that rigorous model that means it's going to be funded by the NHS. And they'll give you care at home or in a nursing home, which is ever more suitable. Now, we have discussed this thing called a national framework, and just so you're aware of what the national framework looks like, it looks a little bit like this. And this can get really, really confusing. So when you're looking at this, understand that the NHS are jumping through thousands of different hoops to get you to where they think is the right place for them to give you the care. So this is just to show you how complicated it is. It's a really complicated system. So NHS funded care is difficult to get hold of, or the continued healthcare, shall I say, it's difficult to get hold of. So moving away from that, then we've got the NHS funded care, or the NHS funded nursing care that we need to look at. So this is non-means tested, so you get it if you're lucky enough to get it. It's not based upon where you are or your finances, and it's paid directly to the care home on your behalf. And the NHS funded nursing care is designed to help with your nursing components of the fee itself. So remember, if you go into a home, you've got the residential home plus the nursing aspect. If you go into nursing care, this will fund for the nursing care. You're still paying for the residential home. And from April of this year, then this is the amount of support that you can get. So standard support is £235 per week, and you get the higher support of £324, and that's dependent upon your situation. So this is the nursing support, or the funded nursing care that you get. So if you go into a nursing home, remember you've got the residential costs, which will be funded by yourself, and then this will give you some support towards your nursing care as well. And then we've got self-funded, and this is where the majority of people will sit, unfortunately, when it comes to any form of long-term care support for the majority of us. Now, again, with self-funding, it is means tested, which basically means if you've got X amount of money, then you will be looking to fund that nursing care and that nursing care support for yourself. And we'll come back to those figures in just a moment. But when we're looking at self-funding, what happens is you'll be assessed financially. So when you go to get some support when it comes to nursing care and the cost of nursing care, a financial assessment will actually look at where you are today financially, and they'll take into account your earnings, your pensions, any benefits, any properties that you've got, including overseas properties, and any form of savings. So if you're applying for care, you will be assessed financially because it is means tested. And then they'll be looking at everything we've got, basically. But there are some things we need to know about all of these. There is this rule, though, that I think everybody needs to be aware of when it comes to long-term care, because if you're going to go for an assessment, it could be quite simple for you to say, well, I'm going to get assessed next week for care and care homes. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to start giving money away before I go for that assessment. But the government's kind of clocked onto that one. And what there is this rule that you need to be aware of called the deliberate deprivation rule. And what this simply means that if you transfer an asset prior to an assessment, when it was reasonably expected that you knew you may need care, then this will still be counted as part of your estate when calculating care costs. So what you can't do is have an assessment booked in for Friday and give everything you've got away on the Thursday, because they will then still treat that as if it was still within your possession. So just be careful with that rule if you can. And also, when they're looking at the assessment, there is this thing called property disregard. So let me explain how this works. So if you're living on your own and nobody else shares your property and you go into care, then 90% of the market value will be taken into account. So this is not necessarily what you'll get for the house, but it's the market value at that point. Because the perception is you're going into care, the house will be sold, so therefore that will then go towards the cost of the care. So they'll take 90% of the cost of the market value, or the value of the property at the point in which you go into care, and that 10% that's been left over is to cover all of the fees that are related to the sale of the property. Now, if you're living in a home and go into care, but you've still got someone else living in that property, so that could be a spouse or a civil partner, a close relative over the age of 60, or a close relative is also incapacitated, then under this scenario, or if you go into temporary care, sorry, then under this scenario, then there is this thing called property disregard. So for the first 12 weeks of your care, the value of the property will not be taken into account when they do the assessment. Unless, of course, you decide to sell the property within those 12 weeks, when it will be taken into account. So if you're in the situation that you're in a property and you go into care, but you've got someone that's living with you, that's a spouse, a close relative, or someone that's incapacitated, or temporary care is required, you've got a 12-week window before they'll take into account the value of your property when they do the assessment. So that's the property disregard that you need to be aware of as well. You've also got other things as well to take into account, so certain investments that you've got when they do the assessment. And again, this is all part of your understanding and planning for long-term care. So certain investments that you've got when you do go into care potentially could be disregarded as well. So in the marketplace, there are investments known as investment bonds. And because they've got an element of life cover attached to it, it can be deemed that these are life policies. And it's because of that, they won't be counted when it comes to the value of your capital. So if you look in the marketplace for investment bonds, things like with profits bonds potentially, then that could be disregarded if you do go into care at any given stage. And if you've got older life insurance policies or policies that have surrender values, then they can be disregarded as well. When the assessment's done, what they will do is, if you've got a joint account, which most people do, so if you are in a relationship, they'll say, you know, I've got £100 in account, but £50 belongs to me, £50 belongs to my wife. They'll take 50% of the ownership. So if you have a joint account where the bulk of the money goes, then it will be treated as 50% ownership if one of you goes into care. And it's for that reason that you might have, or be better off having, separate bank accounts going forward. But that's something that you need to decide for yourself. And what we would say with anything we're discussing, especially with some of these complex matters, please seek the appropriate regulated financial advice. So whatever you're deciding to do when it comes to planning for this, just please seek the appropriate regulated financial advice. So we've discussed the self-funding, we've explained it's means tested. So let's talk about the finances. So will you get support if you've got money in the bank? Well, the reality is, if you've got more than 23,250 currently, then you get no support. You'll get some support if you've got capital between 23,250 and 14,250. And if you've got less than 14,250, then you get full support. Now, remember, that's based upon everything that you've got financially. So house, pension, benefits, anything to do with your finances, that's based upon. So the majority of us, if not all of us, will be paying for our own care if we don't or aren't able to get support from the NHS. Now, this is expected to change in 2025 in October under the Adult Social Care Reform. We don't know what the full rulings are, but this is something just to keep your eye on. But currently, if you've got capital or values of capital in excess of 14,250, then just be aware that your support that you're going to get towards this is going to reduce. If you've got less than that, then you'll get full support. And if you do get self-funding, or you get support when it comes to self-funding, if you do have certain benefits, these will cease at the time in which you get your support. So again, just put some plans in place financially. If you do have certain benefits and your partner or whatever's going to home, just be aware of how those benefits can change. So long-term care is a bit of a problem for the majority of us, and it's one of those things that we think we should be aware of. Can you truly plan for long-term care? I'm not too sure that you can truly plan for it, but I think the reality is you have to be aware of it and how it can impact other individuals. But there are some things you can do. So you can plan, but I don't think you're going to be able to take away the full cost because it's just so expensive. But whatever you decide to do going forward, please, again, I'm just going to reiterate it, seek that financial advice. Go onto the QC website, the quality website for the care homes as well, just to make sure you're getting the value for the home that you're going into. But this is what we could do as part of a plan. But remember, don't take my word for it, seek the advice. So one of the things you could do is you could apply for something called an immediate needs plan, which is an annuity. It's like a pension scheme that pays out. So I'll give you an example of how this works. So this is Mary, and she's got poor care or poor health, and she potentially does need care costs. And when we looked at those ADLs, those daily living things, she's got issues around that. And also she's losing a bit of a mental capacity as well. So one thing that she could do, or one thing that could have been done, should I say, is where she applies for this immediate needs plan. So an immediate needs plan is where she goes to an annuity provider. So this is where you hand over money to a third party. And what they do with that fund is basically do an assessment on you, and then they decide how much income they're prepared to give you. So when you hand the money over to a third party, they'll assess you. So under this scenario, they'll assess Mary. They'll basically assess how long they think you're going to live. And then they'll give you a quote in relationship to that fund that you've handed over. And that can help fund the cost of the care that you've got going forward. And what the annuity provider will then do, so once that's been agreed, how much they're going to fund you, they'll pay you a set fee, but they'll pay that set fee to the home. And because it goes to the home directly, it'll be free of taxes. So that income will not be treated as income tax for Mary. So because the payment is paid directly to the home, it's not treated as income for Mary. So therefore, that's going to be a tax-free payment. And when you're establishing your immediate needs care plan, then you can have a level of income, as we've just mentioned, so this income here, You can have that income that's set, that's just level. But remember, care home costs are actually going up substantially every single year by way more than inflation. And it's because of that you might decide to have it index linked under the possibility that you could be in a care home for a long period of time. So you can have the payment as level, that'll be the cheaper option, or you can have a payment that increases with inflation, and that ultimately will cost you more, which simply means that when you hand over the lump sum, you'll get less payment to start with. But if you're in a home for a long time, then that will then increase. And you can also request guarantees in case Mary dies prematurely. So there are guarantees that could be paid out as well. So as part of your homework, if that's the case when it comes to long-term care, an immediate needs plan, which is an annuity, is something you might want to look into. But remember, seek all the regulated financial advice that you need with these. Other options to kind of fund her care costs could well be, so Mary could use her income from different sources. So again, you could think about, well, if I was to go into a home, I've got income from the pension, from the local government, I've got income from whatever, I've built up my AVCs, of all of these things that you could utilize. Some people do use what is known as an equity release scheme. Now, an equity release scheme kind of comes in two forms. It's where you release equity based upon the value of your property. So there are two versions of this, if that makes sense, in the marketplace. The first version is something called a lifetime mortgage. So this is where you get a loan against the value of your property. But you need to be careful with these schemes. You need to do a lot of research. So what happens, you get a loan based upon the value of your property. The amount of money that you can borrow basically is based upon your age. And what generically happens then, that fund will come to you and you can deal with that fund as you wish. So you could then use the fund to help with the cost of care. Now, under a lifetime mortgage, you still live in the house if you're having care at home, so you don't have to move out of the house, but you can use it to fund care. The way in which these schemes work, though, is that the longer you live, the more expensive they become, because there is an element of interest that's paid upon that loan or charged upon that loan. And if you're not paying that interest back yourself, because you don't have to, you can just let it build up, then it's very, very possible after a 15, 20-year period, then your debt's doubled, purely because of the compound of interest. So with these types of schemes, I would really recommend that you seek regulated financial advice. We ourselves will be doing more content on this one later on, just to explain how these things work, but just be aware that it's there. And the other thing you've got under the equity release schemes is something called a home reversion. So rather than borrowing money based upon the value of your house, what you're actually doing is selling a part of the property. So you're selling a part of the property to the home reversion organisation. You live in the property, and then when you go into care, what basically happens, or if you die, that loan is then repaid, the house is sold, pays the loan, and the balance goes to your estate. So some people then use this as a way, again, of raising money to fund care costs. But again, I'm going to reiterate, seek the right financial advice. And when you understand the financial advice, then be aware of the risks associated with these schemes. And the other way in which you can fund care is by your savings and investments. So it's a bit of a double-edged sword, that if you've got more income than that 14,250, you are paying towards your home and you're not getting as much support. But the reality is, I think for most of us, the more savings and investments we've got, the better it's going to be for ourselves, and we can even potentially decide what's the right thing to do. So can you truly plan for long-term care? I don't think we can truly plan, but there are things that are available for you if you're prepared to go down that route. So you've got the immediate needs annuity, you've got the equity release schemes or lifetime mortgage and home reversion, you've got your income, and you've got your savings and investments. Unfortunately, that's it. So that's long-term care for every single one of you. So hopefully you found this webinar of use today. I know you're not going to retain everything because it is quite complex, and when you get into the details, it's even more complex, but it's just designed to make you think about the care costs and what you potentially could do. Now, we've mentioned that today we've got other webinars running under the inheritance section, so feel free to jump on any other webinar. I think I'm running one in about an hour on inheritance tax. But if you can't make it today, go back into the My Money Matters platform and just click on to one that's suitable for yourself. So they're kind of like box sets, if that makes sense. In addition to that, if you want to get further support about long-term care, then one of the best websites you can go to is gov.uk. So if you go onto that website, you get a lot of detail, and also Age UK as well. So these are the main websites for getting information on long-term care. And for different areas, there are different rules. So if you are living in Wales, Northern Ireland or Scotland, be aware the rules there are different as well. So next steps for yourself, remember, under the My Money Matters platform, we've got education now that covers absolutely everything. Well, we think it covers everything, but if it doesn't, if you've still got needs for education that we don't give you, then what I'd ask you to do politely is drop me an email. So if you think there's something you'd like to discuss that you can't see on the platform, send me an email at suggestions@my-money-matters.co.uk. So suggestions@mymoneymatters.co.uk. Just put in there what you'd like to see when it comes to the educational webinars that we're offering. And if it's possible, then we'll create content for you going forward. So this is your platform. It's your money. It's your platform. Make the most of it if you can. If you've got general questions, then feel free to contact us at customer support, and the details are upon the screen. So ladies and gents, that's the long-term care webinar for today. Hopefully you've found the webinar of use. And what I'm going to do is just jump to a different screen to see if there's any questions. And there are no questions there. That's probably because it's so much information we're giving you, you've got to kind of just retain it. But remember, if you want to come on these webinars again, feel free. As often as you like, just get yourself onto the webinar. And the more times you come around, it's a bit like driving, the more you're going to learn. Remember, we've got other content, especially if you're thinking about inheritance. So you've got the inheritance webinars, you've got the wills webinars, savings and investments webinars, pension webinars, and it's all just for you. So make the most of it whilst you're able to. So thank you very much for your time and attention today. Hopefully you found this content of use, and hopefully we'll see you again in the future. Take care. Enjoy the rest of the day. Bye-bye.